very little space left on my computer because I've got all these files of all these videos.
Oh yeah, yeah.
On my
Well,
computer.
and then you're like, I mean, do you do any editing with your videos as well, or is it pretty much just raw upload?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes I do. I find that I have very little. Yeah, I don't love that. So I don't. I tend to much more enjoy having a good conversation than just uploading it. I just don't. If I start caring too much about that sort
The
of stuff,
edit?
it just sort of kills the edit and just like I don't know. If I care too much about sort of the finished product, it sort of kills the joy of it for me. I'm a very sort
Mm.
of like raw, organic type of person, and so I was doing that for a while, and that was sort of what it was a piece of what helped me to fall out of love with the YouTube thing for a little while anyway.
I definitely want to talk about that. Yeah, let's put a pin in that because that was one of the things I definitely wanted to talk to you about. With the editing thing though is very interesting. I've got a friend who we've been on each other's podcast a few times. His name's Zach Little, and we talked about sort of the you don't want that editing brain to be coming in while you are trying to connect and be present with the person and think like, oh man, I know what clip, at least in my case, like some of the videos that I've done, I like to accentuate or enhance, like if we make a reference. I think we talked about Jordan Peterson and Jordan Hall a few times in
Yeah,
our first conversation. It was like, okay, so Ken
yeah,
just referenced this thing, why don't I just show 10 seconds of it? So
yeah, yeah,
those things I'm not actually thinking of in the moment, but like then once
yeah.
I'm playing it back, I'm like, oh, that actually might be helpful to
Oh yeah,
somebody who's listening and just doesn't have that kind of context. But then if you get too, dialed into that, it's like, oh, I know what I could put here, and then it just becomes, more of a performance or a video essay or something like that. And yet, I really appreciate the people who can. Oh, what's his face? You know that guy Heliocentric, who does the atheist church audit?
yes. I
His name's
vaguely,
Jared,
not
I
well.
think. Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
I don't know him personally, but he is, I think, as his career is like a multimedia video editor. And so maybe for him it's a little more natural and organic. But he's also actually, now that I think about it, he's doing like straight to camera stuff, not as many like interviews. So
Yeah,
in a way, he
yeah,
is kind of editing as he talks to himself or projects into his audience.
yeah, yeah. I think for me, it's as much a temperamental thing as anything. I just like especially when it comes to ideas and sharing ideas. I'm very much sort of I want to play on the edges. I'm not super excited or interested to go back in and represent
Mm,
things,
mm,
and that's I think in there's positives and negatives to that, but I do think that it takes a lot of patience and discipline for me to
oh yeah,
sort
yeah.
of go back through and tie all these things together just because I'm not I don't know I'm more interested in having a really alive conversation on the edge
Mm,
than I am in trying to create a path for a lot of people to follow along in. I think
mm,
something like
mm.
that maybe.
Yeah. No, no, I can see that. I think a part for me that I like to draw back to whatever like the reference material is also an attempt to keep myself honest and like recognizing my remembering of something might be a misremembering or a just if I get a couple of things wrong, maybe I get the gist right, or maybe I get the gist wrong, so that I can kind of go back to it and be like, oh no, yeah, Jordan Hall actually said this, and
Yeah,
here's the actual sort of quote. But
yeah, yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
I guess we'll see if whoever happens to eventually watch this, we'll see which path I chose with the edit.
yeah, yeah.
But I'm glad you mentioned that there was a period where you kind of started to step away from at least publishing as many of these conversations. So I thought that would be a good place to kind of start. And maybe we should disclose that we actually got to meet in person last year.
Yeah,
And
that was awesome.
that was really cool. I got to meet your family. We took a walk around your property, which was amazing. Got the forest and the yurt, and that was a really cool experience. And but other than that conversation, a couple like kind of tweets here and there, you definitely sort of dropped off on your public video publishing. So tell me more about that. If what kicked that off, and it looks like you may have re-engaged here somewhat recently, and then maybe how you got back into that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was super fun when you came to the place, and I loved just the fact that we got to walk through the trails in the woods and sit there. I often now when I'm out at the yurt, when I sit out there on the deck at the yurt, I think about that time we shared together out there. That was really wonderful.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot.
I'll tell you what, my wife and I are actually there's a decent chance that we'll be able to come visit again this fall, and so
Oh, that'd be great.
I'll shoot you the dates to see if because
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, come back, bring
I love
Jessica.
that.
And,
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. And if you want to sleep in the yurt or anything, you're welcome to, or we'll put you up if you need a place to stay. Or
Okay,
just let me know.
that'll be fun. Okay, all right. Now back to climbing Mount Sophia.
Yeah. I mean, oh gosh, there's so many angles on this, right? It's almost, I think there's at least 4 or 5 that are significant. So I'll pick a couple that are probably more worth sharing for this context. Like, so one of them was that, when I initially started climbing Mount Sophia and started publishing videos and having conversations, there was a sense of I was very much, it was a vehicle for me of sort of riding the front edge of a wave of my own exploration of philosophy and theology in a context where I had a really significant biblical background that had been very sort of like very tightly contained in the sort of fundamentalist Christianity I grew up in, and then opened up a little bit in evangelical Christianity and a Bible degree from Biola University and that. And then stagnant, run into Jordan Peterson, that starts blowing some of the edges open, start really reading, pick up Jonathan Pageau and John Vervaeke, and now I've got all sorts of things going on. I'm doing Buddhist practices, I'm reading Buddhist texts, I'm reading mystical Christian texts, I'm reading especially sort of more like, I guess it would technically be phenomenological philosophy type things. And so that was sort of all the foment of what I was working with. And so then I had these opportunities to have conversations with John Vervaeke and all these other people, and so in many ways, climbing Mount Sophia is like, if you were to start with the first video and watch all the way through, from my perspective, it's very much the story of my journey philosophically and theologically through a certain period of time. And so part of what I think caused me to step away was that I got to a point at which that was no longer the appropriate fitted vehicle for what I was working with. Like it fit really well for a certain period of time, especially when there was a lot of when a lot of the development of ideas in the exploration space was in the space of the intellectual. And then so there was a shift when I started, in a very subtle way, I think I started caring more about how the content that or the directionality of the conversations and who I was having conversations with, that was more about sort of like contributing to this bigger space of this little corner and pursuing topics that weren't necessarily my primary interest, but I was, trying to
You felt pulled into those topics, or like,
no, it was more
pushed?
like, hey, I think it was more like, hey, I know if I have a conversation with John Vervaeke and David Schindler, or Jonathan Pageau, I have access to these people. So if I have a conversation with them, I know a bunch of people are going to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a topic that's alive in the zeitgeist. So why don't I talk? And I have some thoughts about it, and I'm sure they do. So let's talk about it. And I don't think there was anything wrong with that at all. But I don't think that it didn't. It wasn't the same thing. Whereas early on, it was very much like, hey, here's something that's really alive for me, and here's somebody who I really have the sense that talking to them, we can have a very interesting conversation. It's going to develop this thing that's going to be very alive. And there was this very subtle shift to, hey, here's a topic that a lot of people care about and seems to be alive, but it's not necessarily super alive for me. And
Like you're recognizing the aliveness in some sort of scene, but you aren't resonating.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a big thing for me, And so then it sort of became about, I don't know, I still don't understand it. And this is just one aspect, right? So that was part of it. It just got a little bit more dry in that sense for me, I think. And then
you've participated in the estuary protocol, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way that we sort of tweak it in our estuary meetings down here is we use the same language that you just used of what is alive for you. So in the second round is when you get to sort of share what is alive for you. That is the language that has sort of trumped everything else. I think maybe the official protocol says contextually, personally, intellectually, maybe spiritually, estuarially, like all these sort of different adverbs describing it. But we just drill it down to what is alive for you, and you can pass in that round. So like the way I just sort of heard you say all that, it was like you were sort of in a space where you were maybe more content to pass on certain things or not. I don't know, maybe that's saying too much.
Yeah, no, I think that was part of it. And so that's one aspect. That's sort of the aspect of the Climbing Mount Sophia engagement in this little corner itself, which I actually don't think it's probably a relatively minor compared to the other. The other is just my personal life. And that was that, last spring, because it was really around April that I just sort of backburnered this very much.
Of 24, right?
Yeah, 24. Yeah. And so there was several things that happened. So my family of origin, a very, very significant traumatic experience, you might say. So one of my brothers had a very severe psychotic episode, which came out of nowhere. And then, as it often does, that supercharged the whole family dynamic that had all sorts of underlying unexploded ordnance that just sort of caused a cataclysm, which continues to be ongoing. So that was very significant, especially because the particularities in my family of origin were such that it carries a very, very heavy weight of relevance for everyone involved. I have 8 siblings. So there's a big group of us, and we were very tight knit and fairly isolated. And so the relevance of it was very strong. So that coincided also in April, my second child was born, and then we did this, and then we did a pretty significant addition to our home that I was overseeing and running a lot of aspects of. So all of those, so that was probably the bigger piece that also just made all of it, took all my energy in a way that wasn't available.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are probably the primary things. There was a little bit of a drying up of the passion and the relevance of what I was doing on climbing Mount Sophia, and then there was just a lot of aspects of my personal life that needed a lot of attention and energy.
Well, and I know that being a parent, brings different dynamics, and so you've got two now.
Yeah.
And you sort of settle into new routines, and then they break into more sort of fun things. And so at some point since then, the aliveness returned, or an itch needed to be scratched. Do you remember? Do you remember feeling like, oh gosh, yeah, this is something that needs to be addressed, and I'm gonna call up one of my conversation partners to address it? Do you remember what that was?
So I've had to do a great deal of work in relation to certain topics that have then become relevant to these conversations. So one of them has been authority. Which has given rise to some of these conversations with David. The issue of there's significant difficulties in the relationship to fatherhood.
Yeah, I remember I caught that. So I think you've had, is it 2 conversations with him recently? Okay, I caught the first one around fatherhood and authority, and then I haven't got to catch up with the most recent one. So okay. So I have some context around this.
Yeah. So the second one is just delving a lot more deeply into the authority piece. And then Jordan Hall, I think that had come out of seeing his conversation with Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke.
Yes. Yeah, I caught that one too. That was great.
Yeah, and so
did that kind of blow your mind a little bit? Like, do you remember like where you were when it was like, oh my gosh, it's happening. We finally got Jordan Hall and Jordan Peterson together, and we've got John Vervaeke to thank for it.
Yes. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think I told him, I was like, that was one of the first videos that I had been excited to watch or pay attention to in a while.
Yeah. In total, like in terms of consuming content, or Jordan Peterson videos in particular?
In total, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Jordan Peterson's videos haven't been, terribly interesting to me for a while.
I think he had someone talking about aliens like last week. I mean, it's a different Jordan Peterson podcast these days.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I also caught that one with you and Jordan Hall catching up on that, and that was awesome.
Yeah, because this has always been something that I've been just very, very interested in is getting down to getting to the minutia of what we're talking about when we're talking about sin, and trying to understand not just intellectually, but to understand in a phenomenological participatory way, like how does it look to be under the pull of sin, to be living in sin, to have sin be happening, and not make it this big guilty thing that I'm worried about for justificatory reasons. Like get out of the justification framework, but try to understand it as how do I live less wrongly, and if I can, and the deeper I can sort of get the felt sense of what it feels like to be living in sin versus not, then I can get better at not screwing life up. Right. So it's a very pragmatic sort of interest is too light of a word and obsession is too strong of a word, right?
Sure.
Like fascination maybe because the reason is that I have had several iterations of insights into that process that have allowed me to actually like, make my life a lot better. Or not, that's probably putting too much emphasis on my own willpower. But my life has gotten better as a consequence of having insights into how that works.
And I was struck by your language of not talking about committing sins, but living in sin. And I almost was curious as how you would would you contrast that in like living in the spirit or living in the light, or like what sort of language is alive for you around what the opposite of living in sin tends to be for you?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think all of those would be fair. Living in the spirit, living in the light. Um, having the salience landscaping show up in a way that's towards the good, and not towards a sort of self-referential, um, lower order prioritization.
Yeah, like something that's coming to mind as you're describing this is like the trend of the last several years of biohacking, and really just trying to optimize your life on all these like sort of bio ways. Like, what would be the appropriate spiritual equivalent of that? And even the hacking part is probably inappropriate, but
Yeah, because
it's yeah.
it's the same sort of idea. It's like how do I optimize my spirit? Like how does how does my spirit become aimed like genuinely at the highest at God, and not just in sort of a way that I just sort of say that and pray it and hope it, but how do I actively participate that?
Yeah,
And like do all those things too. Like I'm not saying don't do those things, but like how can all of my efforts be coordinated in such a way that gets optimized? And I think pointing out the hacking as being a problem there is good, because hacking gives this sort of sense that like I'm outside tinkering with something because I know how it's supposed to be, right? And it's like no, it's not technologized. Like you have to do it from the inside with extreme humility and like yeah.
It's more of a surrendering than a finally controlling and manipulating.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Well, and I'm starting to forget if this is like part of our recorded conversation or our in-person conversation, but I remember you sharing about some of the fellowship that you have with like some guys at your gym, and I just remember just being struck and wondering over time, like if has that continued, has that deepened, has it waned, like what is that sort of social and community, communing that you've been having with these guys, and do you still feel that your role is kind of in a leadership or facilitator function, and is there enough to where you are sort of getting fed back from that as a participant?
Yeah.
That was a lot of words.
Yeah, no, I think I hear you. Yeah. Yeah, so I started this group like almost 5 years ago now, from the gym that I go to. I just call it a wisdom group. And it's basically estuary protocol, kind of. Like that's how it ends up working out. The group started and was happening for a couple of years before I learned about estuary. So we just meet in a coffee shop, and yeah, it's still going strong. Like there's 15 guys.
Wow.
Sometimes it's it always changes, right? More people come, some people go. But yeah, it's still there, it's still going, and I find it to be a really cool thing because I very much try to posture myself like Socrates in the group, and there's guys all over the map in terms of how much they read and how much they're participating in spiritual exercises or church. There's people that have never been to church. There's people that are very deeply committed. There's strong Protestants. There's strong Catholics. There's a whole gamut. but I
Not-
tend to.
I
Yeah.
would maybe argue that you are participating in the church, but maybe that's where we
Yeah.
can go next.
Yeah. So,
And,
yeah, that's
and
been
when you
great.
say you played the role of Socrates, you mean sort of in sort of a questioning, not like the going back to the authoritative, like this is the way kind of thing, but just you are facilitating and drawing out questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's very much like my what I try to do is always I mean and I've learned a ton from this group. Like I'm by no means, just sort of like showing up as the guy who knows things and teaching things. That's not it at all. It's very much like I'm continually trying to open up the edges of the concepts that are being thrown on the table, and whenever things are sort of resolved and everybody feels like, yeah, we've got to the end, I'm the guy who jumps in and says, well, but what about this? Here's the problem, so I think that's sort of the point of the pursuit of wisdom as the goal of the group is like, yeah, great, we found something, we've gone deeper, we've opened something up, and we're more clear about something, but then like now open it up to the edges again. And like so
There's always another edge.
yeah, I think so. My sense of my role is very much continuing to point to the moreness. That's sort of
Are there others that take turns playing that role in the group as well? Is this something? Is it weekly or monthly?
it's a weekly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
we
you
meet
can take
every
a week off and someone else will step in, or is it like is it on your shoulders? And if Ken's not there,
No, it's great because I mean it's as much of it's a very significant community too. I mean there's guys, it's been going for almost 5 years now. So there's a couple of guys who have gone through divorces. There's a couple of guys who one guy's his father recently passed away, and there's several of the guys have had major health events. So we're just the things of life, right, are happening, and it's become a very significant place of support. We support each other. We do different community projects around. There's a couple of nonprofits that work with kids and things in the area that we work with, and when they need a project done, we show up, and we can show up with 10 guys and do a decent project pretty quickly. And
so it's not just a conversation group. It's you guys are getting together and doing things.
yeah, I mean we're just living life together, and a lot of us see each other at the gym, and so we're having conversations. It's interesting, right? Because like we don't live together, right? But there is this really significant, in many ways, like daily participation in life together. That's because it's oriented towards wisdom, and there's nobody in the group that doesn't take God seriously or the Bible seriously. So there's a common sense of respect in that way, but there's also this common orientation towards wisdom and phileo sophia. I mean, I've laid that out several times. So there's sort of this sense that like, yeah, we're all brothers. We're all trying to live our lives as well as we can, and we respect our differences, but we're also like we're all here for each other, supporting each other. And we get together every week and actually, have conversations where we try to ask the deepest questions we can, and wrestle with things.
I'm curious about the makeup of the group, and you don't have to share details. But as the group grown or declined in numbers or participation, where you've had some folks kind of drop off, and then some. So ask that. Have you had some folks drop off?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, when it initially started, there were maybe like 6 of us.
Okay.
And then for the last, I would say, really 3 years, it's been pretty much, you can pretty much count on anywhere from 8 to 15 people showing up every week. And
About the same people, or just the same sort of range of numbers?
yeah, I mean, the same range of numbers, and those 8 people that are pretty much always there are pretty much always there. And then there's six, seven guys who, they come when they're there, but they're either out of town often because they work out of town, or, different things happen, so they're not always available to be there. And then there's a few guys who will show up, once every 2 months or something.
Oh, good.
And then, I mean, there have been people that, there's been several people who have left. Nobody really on bad terms. I mean, there was one guy who, there was one guy who was fairly strong in his opinions about, he was sort of a more of a fundamentalist Christian, and he was pretty willing to share things that he thought other people were doing wrong. And I think that, he ended up moving. He moved for work, and so it didn't work for him to come anyway. But I think it wasn't like bad terms, but I don't know that it was like, there was something there. But otherwise, like, there's been several people who have had to move, and that sort of thing. But there's never been anybody who's like, no, I didn't like this. I don't want to come anymore.
Well, the reason I asked that is both on the do they not like it anymore, or it's not a good fit for them anymore perspective, and then also the, like, does the group sort of miss them, and does the group feel an obligation to reach out, and even like, I think Jordan Hall shared this with you and me, and I think several others. This spirit of like no man left behind. Mm-hmm. So like, if one of your guys stops showing up, is there a felt sense within the group that we need to reach out? We need to confirm that he wants to disassociate, disfellowship, or something like that. And like, I guess I'm sort of asking, like, what is the commitment that you all feel that you have for each other in this group?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's pretty organic, right? Like, there's not and I've always tried to make that a point. I always, whenever I invite somebody, I say, hey, you're welcome to come. Don't feel any pressure. Or when guys stop showing up, like, there's one guy in particular who, I don't really know all the reasons. I think, there were a couple of the other guys in the group that maybe he didn't necessarily get along with quite as well, and I don't know what all happened. But nothing bad happened. But I think I'm typically the guy who reaches out the most. But there are several other guys that do too. If somebody stops showing up, we'll usually say, hey, is everything okay? Like, and if they say, hey, it doesn't work for me anymore for this reason or that reason, or I move away, we definitely try to keep in touch, but there's also this, if people are going another direction, that's fine. Doesn't really bother.
Yeah.
But yeah, we haven't had any sort of like, I've been very grateful that there hasn't been any drama or sort of like a need to address things, which has been
good. In our first conversation, I think early on, we even talked about the formative experiences that you had with church splits. And so like, I'm just like running everything that you're talking about sort of through that same kind of filter of like how people fellowship and what a church is, and even like the etymology of like the word of like just the called out ones. So like, these guys are sort of called out or called into this kind of fellowship together. And then does it maintain or doesn't it? And what responsibilities does everyone feel towards each other when the dynamics change, or the season of life changes? Like you said, guys going through divorce, guys going through health issues, and whether or not this group helps them through that better or differently than a more traditional church or their family, and gosh, we haven't even talked about, like, you just, talked about going through an intense, season and maintaining with these guys. I mean, how was that experience for you to have them, walk with you through that, or continue to walk with you through that, I guess?
I think, from my experience, okay, I'll talk about it from this angle. The sense of your ability to have a sense of who you are, right? That is in some sense stabilized by the networks that you're embedded within.
Sure.
And so, like you mentioned, family or church, or friendships, right? These are all various aspects or dimensions of these networks, and so that, like that group, and who I am when I'm around those guys, who I find myself to be, and who they respond to me as, has provided a stability that has been very significant through the time of this season, for me. And
They remind you of who you were in a previous season, so that you can remember that.
Well, there's a continuity to who I am, right? When I show up there, that, you know, when who I am in this other context, right? Who I am in the context of my family of origin is very much under negotiation. And there's, you know, that whole identity structure is fragmented and confused, right? When that was stable, that was a significantly stable piece of my identity, or my self-understanding, or my self-perspective, or my sense of me. And this one of that group had developed, right? So then when this one all gets blown up, you know, my returning to this group, to this stable network, to this sense of to the sense of who I am, provides a stable reference point for all this negotiation that's confusing. And I have others as well, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for. But I would say that was the most significant way that I was contributory. There's very little. I mean, I've sort of shared the very basic details of, roughly about as much as I've shared here in terms of what this confusion is. So there hasn't been a lot of, you know, it hasn't been therapeutic or sort of specifically helpful in working through the issues at play. But it's more the sense of stability of the network of friendships that has been really significant. And the guys who have gone through divorce and specifically have said a very similar sort of thing.
Yeah. We've had some of that in our group, our estuary groups here in our community as well. And the reason that I was asking you just about when people step away is I feel like as we began, I think it was like May of 2024 when we started our of in-person estuary groups. And it was very much kind of like, here's this thing, you're open to it, you're invited to participate, but you're not obligated to participate. And so that felt like the best way to set that up. And then over time, as people would, you know, get busy, myself included, you understand when they can't show up, they can't make it. And then you don't want it to become this obligation that they then feel that they can't say no to, and you don't want to be authoritative and be like, well, you committed to it, or we committed to each other. So that is a tension that I'm wrestling with right now with our group. And even just the idea of, so your group is not officially an estuary group, but it follows the estuary protocol. And I think that's what I've been starting to kind of unpack, is that estuary is not a thing. It's not a what. It's not even really a who. It's a how. Like it is a way to be with each other that reliably gets you deep into conversation and connection with someone else, seeking what's true, what's honest, what's really there. Yeah. But it's not, oh, we're estuarians, or we are all sort of pointed towards the same thing, other than hopefully the truth or honesty, something good.
Yeah.
And so pulling back what is an estuary group versus what is a group that has a certain level of commitment to each other, that happens to practice the estuary protocol, is where kind of my mind has been at. And back to the very first question that we had talked about before, like, what is church?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at in terms of who are the people and how do we connect with each other through these even heavier seasons of life,
Yeah.
that help remind us who we are and our identity. And so when I ask you, however long ago, are you looking to find a church? You tell me about all these other ways in your life that I would now understand as being church.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, that the whole question of church has shifted for me a lot. Especially recently.
Well, we talked about the kids too, because I think you had your daughter, but then things are just different with kids, or it can be. Sorry, you were about to go somewhere, and I jumped in.
No, I mean, that is a part of it. But gosh, I don't know. I I think to me, where I'm at right now, it looks like there are layers of church.
Mm.
And that we have often, that there's this underlying assumption that what it means to be part of a church or not part of a church is somehow significant in like that there's a justification aspect, right? That, like, if you're not a part of a church, you're sort of you're there's something you need to justify.
Sure.
And that if you are a part of a church, well, then you're justified in some way, or it's about this sort of the problem of not being where you're supposed to be. And I think,
did you feel that in the way I asked you, like, or is...
No, this is a bigger, no,
Okay,
not at all, not at all. This is just sort of a larger reflection, and also, I think, trying to set context for what I'm going to say later. Like, where I'm at now is, like, I think that I think that the wisdom group is in a way a form of church, sort of a lower form of church, I guess. And I think in that way it's significant, it's meaningful, it's good. I think there's genuine. It's a genuine community that's organic and good and real and meaningful. But I mean, I've become more and more convinced as time has gone on that if we're talking about the highest form of church, that must inevitably come to land in the place of the Eucharist.
Okay.
And that I have a lot of ambivalences about all sorts of aspects of the traditional churches, Orthodox and Catholic. But the longer things go on, and the more life experience I have, and the more clarity I find through navigating some of these spaces, the more I've become convinced that there really is something about the Eucharist specifically, that all of the other ambivalences can be in place for me, and I think those are fine. But for me, I think the Eucharist is probably the place where it lands.
So I'll confess that Eucharist is a word, and it's a word that I don't use myself very much. It's one that is used around me. Communion was the word. Like, I kind of have them as almost like synonyms.
Tension there.
Not even really a tension. Almost like they're the same thing. But
Convertible.
Yes, but I would suspect, and I'm very open to someone helping to discuss why they might be or necessarily are different. So you've got an open mind right here to make a case for what the Eucharist might be,
Yeah,
and why it resonates for you. I'd be interested in
yeah,
hearing more.
yeah. I mean,
Is it, and maybe respond to that? Is that similar? Did you use the word communion differently, or were those kind of interchangeable in your growing up as well?
yeah. I mean, for me growing up, the Eucharist was never. I didn't even. That wasn't a term that I had any familiarity with. I would say that my upbringing was the very end of the line of the Protestant train,
Mm,
right? So
mm,
if you imagine that sort of the church, the original church, is going along it's all one train on one track until you have the Great Schism, and then there's sort of now there's two tracks and two trains, and then off the Catholic track, Luther jumps off, and then people start and then it's just boom, boom,
sure.
boom, 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 and you get depot after depot of options for diversions. And the place where I grew up in was it was like symbolically the feeling is very much something like waking up on a spaceship that's on its last gasp of fuel that is completely not in the neighborhood of anything. Like
Hmm.
it's the end of the line, right?
Wow.
If you continue to fragment and fragment and fragment over basically the idea that there's no higher order mediating um, body to mediate the meaning of scripture, and therefore everyone's version of understanding scripture is equally valid. And so you just sort of continue to separate and separate and separate until you're the last man standing. Because yours is the version of scripture that is the only one that you can't be with anyone else, because your version of scripture is different than anyone else's version of Christianity. At which point those
Which
things are
I
interchangeable.
resonate with that. Like that feels that level of loneliness around whatever my view of scripture, my theology. Like I feel that.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's sort of and I don't think through foolishness of his own accord necessarily is sort of like where my dad is, right?
Mm,
And sort of that's what I inherited, was this conviction that like there was a very strong and stable spiritual home that we inhabited, but like it was very tight and very small, and no one else was participating in it. And then eventually I realized, oh wait, this is complete nonsense, and I woke up and stepped out of that. I'm like, wait, this wasn't a
mm,
spiritual home at all.
mm,
Not only that, like we're completely like, where are we? Like
mm.
we were out in the middle of the desert somewhere at the end of a line. We've been, it's been a little push pull cart that we've been on, and that just broke down, and there's no more tracks, and there's nobody around. So like, what are we doing here? So that was the sense of it, right? It's just that it was disconnected from everything. It's meaningless. You're out in the middle of nowhere. And so it's hard for me to talk about all this because it's not like fully formed. I don't have like a clear
Yeah, well,
argument.
I think that the thing I was interested in was Eucharist. So
Yeah,
if
yeah,
it wasn't around, like, when did Eucharist become alive for you to the point where you would put it as kind of the highest, you know,
yeah. It's been
expression
a
of
slow
church?
it's been a slow process. But it has to do. I mean, embodiment is a big piece of it, right?
Okay.
That whatever we're doing, it has to land here and now in the real world. And it has to be the place where it has to be a participation that's a
Okay.
ritual that fundamentally binds the spiritual and the physical world together,
Hmm.
right? That's accessible across all the layers, right? A moment, a place where you can meet God, that every layer of reality is active, in the space of the meeting. And I think that's what the Eucharist is, right? That I like the Orthodox understanding a little bit better than the Catholic, at least sort of at least as it's generally understood, right? There's the nuance around this is endless. But the sense that, when I think now of the term communion, I think of the sense of a sign, right? You're looking at a sign, you're participating in a sign in the effort to remember intellectually this moment of Christ on the cross and that being significant for me in some way now. But it's this sort of intellectual exercise of remembering, and the act of eating the bread and drinking the wine is not like in and of itself, the bread is just bread and the wine is just wine. We don't think there's anything mysterious happening there. We're just doing it so that, I don't know, because Jesus told us to remember.
Yeah, right? Do this in remembrance of me. Yep.
Right. But I think the way I think of it now, I mean, so Shmemon in For the Life of the World, Alexander Shmemon, that was the place that this really, like, I haven't been able to get away from it ever since I read that.
I've heard you talk about him a few times. Yeah.
but that sense that that it's not a sign that points you somewhere in terms of, I see this and I look over there, but that this is in itself participating in that moment in such a way that moment becomes the reality that is present now, right? That the moment of Christ's death and resurrection is an eternal reality that comes to be present in my life, and I come to be present with it, not because of some intellectual exercise of I eat this bread and drink this wine and think about something, but that when my soul and spirit, body and mind are all oriented towards that moment, and I'm participating by ingesting this substance, that, symbol in the most strong sense of the word possible, that symbolically binds and presences that reality and changes me, right? Like, I'm very interested in food. I'm very interested in food. I'm very interested in what we eat and what we ingest. Partially because that's my job, in a sense. Like, I'm a modern priest where I try to help people to actually make good choices for themselves. And one of the things I've become convinced of is that maybe besides how you conduct yourself in relationship to other people, the most important other relationship you have is with food. And that it is a relationship, that you don't make choices about your food the way you think you do. You have a relationship that structures what even is relevant to you when you look at the grocery store shelves. And that relationship percolates through everything in your life, but it's of infinite importance because what you eat literally becomes what you are. And that there is something genuinely meaningful about putting substances into your body that have gone through iterations of machinery before they go into your body, versus things that have grown in the ground and then you put them in your body. And in that same way, that there is something about the Eucharist and the connection across, like the connection of spirit transfer through people across time, such that, the priest who's performing the ritual of the Eucharist, is part of an unbroken line back to Christ, to the people who were like there at the moment that was instantiated. That spirit is able is genuinely present, and that therefore when you eat that you actually are, like, constitutively, even in a physical sense, your person is turned ever so slightly, maybe, but to the degree that you're completely oriented towards it, the entire person that you are is oriented upwards towards Christ, such that the pattern, the spirit of Christ, is able to land in you in a more real way. And I say this as someone who's never taken the Eucharist.
And is it? Do you have a date in the future? Do you have just a general openness to the right invitation? Because that sounds like gosh, my mind just went into two separate weird. But maybe actually this will help to see how I'm understanding this. So my mind went to two places you were describing all of that. The first one was music, often called worship, and like very intense experiences of music. We'll call it worship, and then sex with your spouse, with your beloved, and so it almost sounded like you were like the guy who was talking about this amazing rapturous concert experience, but who doesn't play an instrument or doesn't sing or like isn't, or a forlorn incel who's just never been with somebody else. Like, so those are weird examples of how I was interpreting your embodied participatory transformative alignment with the Spirit through the Eucharist. Like, are those examples? Ping off of both of those for me to help me to triangulate around the Eucharist.
I like those both really well, and I think you're very much hearing me, because when I think of the transformative concert experience, right? That's sort of a mystical calling forth of the soul, there's this sense of being connected into something that's alive and powerful and calls you outside of yourself in an ecstatic way. But there's not necessarily, I mean, you can be dancing and all those things, but there's not the sort of like obvious and powerful physical sensation capacity or aspect of it that's present in the sexual aspect. It's the sexual example, right? Whereas, and this is something I'm also deeply interested in, is how do you make love properly? Right? Like, how do you make love in such a way that it's, and I think making love is probably the biggest, it's probably one of the most significant, if not the most significant, miss of Christianity, is to not properly explore and elevate and put forward a glorious possibility of how to make love properly, and the level of sacramental participation available in Christ through making love. I think it's a relatively poorly explored area that is, and the ways in which that it's been denigrated have been tremendously negative for all of Christianity. So that's just a thing I'll throw out. But yeah, I mean, I think that aspect of glorifying sex from the incel place, or glorifying the experience of music without the ability to participate deeply as a musician. That aspect of but I haven't taken the Eucharist. It's this, coming from a radical Protestantism, the notion that I would ever, find myself in the position to actually participate in the Eucharist, which of course you can't get to unless you're actually, a confirmed member of the church, either Orthodox or Catholic. That has never been on the horizon of genuine possibility for me until probably the last month. It's probably within the last month to 6 weeks that my felt sense when I turn to look at that, right? When I actually internally turn and look at the what would it be like to actually go through with joining, say, the Catholic Church, such that would be available to me. it was probably only 6 weeks ago that I had the first experience where I actually looked at that and wasn't like, oh,
Yeah, no, as you were describing it, I was like, that sounds terrifying. Like
yeah,
like holy terror.
yeah, yeah. Well, because there's all the, I mean, gosh, that whole thing, like we have 500 plus years of vilification of the church, uh, of the traditional church that I have been quite steeped in, I would say. And by no means, like I said, I have a lot of ambivalences about the church. Like if I do end up in one of those contexts, which we've been going to, there's a local Catholic and Orthodox church, and we've gone to both of them a few times, and I think we're going to go to the Catholic church again this week. So we're poking our nose around. Um, but I think that there's a lot of aspects of it towards which I anticipate I'll likely remain ambivalent. Because I do think there's all sorts of, they are what they are, right? And there's plenty of problems, but I don't know if, obviously, in the way I'm talking about it, right? There's something that has changed for me in relation to the Eucharist, that calls to me.
That calls to you because that's what the church is, right? The called out ones. You're being called into something. Huh. Yeah, man, I'm sitting with this because it was I started to get like a little bit of even like a vision like in the middle of my room here of like that you had described the eternal resurrection of Jesus. Like, I don't know, it was like floating over in the room over there in a way that kind of freaked me out about its intensity.
Yeah, yeah,
So I appreciate that. My gosh, my brain is also sort of going towards like psychedelics, and I'm realizing that the sort of the psychedelic, I was about to call it hysteria. That's not the right word. The psychedelic. I feel like psychedelics the psychedelic renaissance seems to be waning, at least in my in the areas of the internet that I have been kind of poking around in. Have you noticed that as well? I know that like Maps maybe failed or was severely limited in their efforts to get certain therapeutic trials, passed at a federal level. Like are you seeing that or feeling that as
yeah.
well, or is it just me?
I used to be more tapped into that, I think, than I am now. Because there was a period of time that I got accepted into one of the programs to train as a psilocybin facilitator here in Oregon. And I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect, and I've had a lot of really significant personal insight and breakthrough and goodness that's occurred in my life because of participation with psilocybin. So I have very few negative things to say aside from very serious cautions. I mean, I think there's really significant reason to be cautious around psychedelics, but I don't have anything negative to say on the face. But yeah, I mean, I don't hear as much about it. But it's also like I have heard a good bit of positive aspect here in Oregon. There do seem to be a lot of people who are getting a lot of benefit from, because now it's becoming fairly accessible for therapy here in Oregon. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of positives.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to take us away from our conversation around what the Eucharist or what that transformative experience, but like the intensity, like there's some sort of marriage there between kind of food and consumption, and you are what you eat, and the physical aspects of that, and the potential spiritual aspects of it that we were talking about when you truly make love.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of space that the church could could benefit from taking psychedelics seriously. I've long thought that, and I've yet to hear anyone make a actually what I consider to be a well argued position for why psychedelics are seen as necessarily outside the boundaries of traditional Christianity.
Yeah. Did you ever read Brian Muraresku's book,
I didn't.
The Immortality Key? Are you familiar with him and that whole thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I listened to a few of those podcasts that he was on and things like that.
Yeah, I loved it. We did a book club on it.
Okay.
We did a deep dive, so over 2 or 3 months,
Nice.
several of us kind of, unpacking and wrestling with what something like that could have been with the church and psychedelics. And interestingly enough, similar to the incel, imagining, Brian is a psychedelic virgin still.
Right.
I guess I should.
Right.
Meaning he has not participated in psychedelics, I should say.
Yeah.
And he's my age, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And I what all that would look like, that would obviously be a whole, but that's, again, I mean, I think if I do end up becoming a part of the church, like, I don't think I'm going to be, my asking of questions and sort of trying to open edges and things, I don't think is going to stop. So, I'm very much not interested in sort of participating in a traditional church with the sense of just like, here's this whole church, like, you just come in and put on the hat and now you follow this thing. Like, no, I'm not. I think that's actually, I mean, I have nothing against that. And I think there's people for whom that's the case, but, or for whom that's a reasonable path. I don't think that's ever going to be the path for me. I'm interested in the Eucharist, and I'm interested in but I'm not interested in just sort of like coming underneath and just following something. I think that the Eucharist is there to offer you a deep participation in Christ in a way that's not quite available. That's in, like, I think what it is it's like it's a purity of connection that's not available at any other space in the same way. I think that's the way to say it. It does, but I don't think it's.
Wow.
But I don't think it's the sort of thing that it's like, oh, you're going to hell if you don't have that, right? Or you're like, that's why I qualified all the justification aspects earlier.
Yeah. There are different sort of levels, or what was the word you said about church? I don't know if you said the word levels, but
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, for me, it's like, as far as I'm concerned, like, Jesus of Nazareth being the Christ is the most real thing that's ever been. Like, it is the point of maximal reality as far as I'm concerned. So then the question is like, well, how do I orient towards that maximally and get closest to it? And that's where I ended up at the Eucharist. And again, like, we'll see where I'm at as time goes by. But
I love it. Well, that's that feels like a good spot to kind of land the plane here for this conversation. Let's see where you're at. So,
yeah, man.
we'll I'll get this edited together in some way and get it out there, and I'm sure at some point in the future we'll have another recorded conversation to see where you go from here. And and there, like I said, there's a chance I'll see you in person sooner rather than later. So yeah,
I love that.
I'll stop the recording here, and then we can look at some of those
right.
details offline. So let me pause this, and
Always a pleasure.
yeah, man.